January 6, 1944, the cold English air hung over the 8th Air Force headquarters at High Wycombe. Inside, Major General Jimmy Doolittle stood before Major General William Kepner, commander of the 8th Fighter Command. Behind Kepner's desk, a large sign read, "The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive." Doolittle studied it, jaw tight. "That sign," he said quietly, "needs to come down. It's wrong." Within hours, a new one took its place. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy German fighters. It was more than a slogan, it was a revolution in thinking. For months, the U.S. bombing campaign had been bleeding dry. On October 14, 1943, 300 B-17s had struck the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. The mission hit its mark, but 60 bombers never came home. Over 600 men were killed or missing. Lieutenant Robert Morgan of the Memphis Belle wrote that night, "We are being slaughtered. The fighters turn back at the border and we fly on alone into hell." The problem was clear: American escorts, P-38 Lightnings and P-47 Thunderbolts, couldn't fly far enough. They turned back 300 miles from the target, leaving the bombers defenseless. The Luftwaffe attacked in disciplined waves, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, tearing into formations with 30mm cannons and rockets. By December, General Hop Arnold had issued an ultimatum: unless the German Air Force is destroyed, Overlord cannot proceed. D-Day itself depended on controlling the skies. And just as hope seemed lost, a sleek new aircraft appeared: the North American P-51 Mustang, powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. It was fast, long-ranged, and deadly. Captain Chuck Yeager said it best: "The P-51 is faster, times better, and turns tighter than anything the Germans have. This changes everything." The arrival of the P-51 Mustang offered potential, but strategy would determine victory. For years, fighter doctrine had been defensive. Escorts flew tight around bombers, guarding them like shepherds with strict orders never to stray. When German fighters attacked, escorts reacted briefly, then returned to formation. It sounded reasonable, but it was fatal. The Germans dictated the fight, attacking and disappearing before the Americans could respond. Bombers were meat on the table, as one pilot put it. Jimmy Doolittle, newly appointed commander of the 8th Air Force, was not a man of half measures. A scientist, test pilot, and war hero who had led the daring Tokyo raid, he believed defense was death. "You can't win by reacting," he told his staff. "You win by attacking." On his first day, he issued a shocking order: fighters were no longer bound to the bombers. They would range far ahead, 50 miles forward, 25 to either side, hunting the Luftwaffe wherever it formed. When bombers turned home, fighters would drop low, strafing airfields, trains, depots, anything that moved. Reaction was immediate. Some fighter pilots cheered. "We're no longer shepherds," Colonel Don Blakeslee told his men. "We're wolves." But bomber crews were horrified. "We'll be slaughtered," one navigator wrote in his diary. Doolittle knew better. The best defense was offense, destroying the Luftwaffe before it could strike. It was a gamble that could either cripple Germany or doom the air war entirely. All that remained was to test it in combat. The test came on January 29, 1944. Over 800 bombers roared east toward Frankfurt, escorted by the P-51 Mustangs of the 357th Fighter Group. As the bombers leveled out, the Mustangs surged ahead into enemy territory. Near Bonn, 50 Messerschmitts rose to intercept. They never saw the Americans coming. Diving from the sun, the P-51 struck first, Merlin engines howling, tracers flashing across the sky. 8 minutes later, 13 German fighters were down. 2 Mustangs were damaged, but both limped home. Not a single bomber from that formation was lost. For the first time, the hunters had become the hunted. Doolittle's strategy was working. 3 weeks later came the ultimate test operation, Argument, soon known as Big Week. On February 20, 1944, more than 1,000 bombers lifted off from England and Italy, targeting German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe couldn't ignore the threat. Nearly 900 German interceptors took to the skies to defend their lifeline. The air over central Germany became a swirling chaos of fire, contrails, and falling wreckage. The Mustangs and Thunderbolts tore through German formations, striking them as they climbed, as they landed, as they rearmed. "They attack us before we can even climb," wrote German ace Major Heinz Parr. "There is no escape." By the 5th day, the cost was brutal but decisive. The Americans lost 226 bombers and 28 fighters, heavy but sustainable. The Luftwaffe lost over 350 aircraft and nearly 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. The tide of the air war had turned. The impact of Big Week was catastrophic for Germany. Experienced Luftwaffe leaders, aces who had survived since 1940, were gone. In their place came young pilots with barely 150 hours of training. Some hadn't even fired their guns in flight. Meanwhile, American pilots entered combat with more than 450 hours of training and an unshakable morale. The difference was night and day. In March 1944, when 8th Air Force bombers struck Berlin, the Luftwaffe threw everything it had into the air. The result was slaughter. The Americans lost 69 bombers. The Germans lost twice as many fighters and nearly 70 of their best pilots. Today, one German officer wrote, "I watched the fighter arm die." The Germans could still produce planes more than 1,000 each month, but had no trained pilots to fly them. Each new recruit lasted, on average, only 2 weeks. Training hours fell to 50. American raids intensified. Airfields were bombed daily, fuel depots destroyed, and transport lines shattered. By April, the Luftwaffe was collapsing. On May 8, 900 American bombers crossed into Germany, escorted by 750 fighters. Not one German plane rose to meet them. Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's once proud air commander, reported grimly to Gring, "The fighter force is destroyed. We have aircraft but no pilots and no fuel." The Americans attack at will. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was now a ghost. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The skies over Normandy belonged to the Allies. 14,000 Allied sorties filled the air, while the Luftwaffe managed fewer than 300. German tanks, convoys, and artillery were torn apart before they could even reach the beaches. Field Marshal Rommel wrote bitterly to his wife, "The enemy has complete air superiority. Our troops cannot move in daylight without being attacked. The war is lost." Doolittle's gamble, once branded madness, was vindicated. Between January and June 1944, the Luftwaffe lost over 2,500 fighter pilots, 3/4 of its strength. The average German pilot's experience dropped from 200 combat hours to under 50. American kill ratios soared to 4-to-1. Bombers that once flew into slaughter now crossed Europe with minimal losses. Still, the price was staggering. More than 26,000 American airmen died in Europe, more than the entire U.S. Marine Corps lost in the Pacific. "We talk about tactics and numbers," said Lieutenant Robert Johnson, one of America's top aces. "But it came down to thousands of young men flying into combat every day, knowing many wouldn't come back. We won because we attacked." By August, the Luftwaffe existed only on paper. Germany still built aircraft tens of thousands but had neither fuel nor pilots to fly them. Even the revolutionary Me-260 jet came too late. "We had aircraft in abundance," one surviving ace later said, "but no one left to fly them." History would trace the turning point back to that cold morning in January 1944, when Jimmy Doolittle ordered a sign removed from a wall. A few words had changed the world. "The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy German fighters." That order transformed strategy, crippled the Luftwaffe, and gave the Allies the skies over Europe. It paved the way for the invasion of Normandy and the liberation of a continent. Years later, Doolittle was asked if he ever doubted his decision. He smiled faintly. "Changing the fighter tactics was the hardest thing I ever did," he said. "People thought it was madness. But you can't win a war by defending. You win by attacking." Today, both signs, the old and the new, hang side by side in the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. Together they tell a story written in blood, encourage the story of how one man's insight and one squadron's will rewrote the laws of aerial warfare, securing victory from the clouds above Europe.